Thank you for joining us for Turn the Page with Paige, brought to you by the Goddard School. I'm your host, Paige Holsey, but you can call me Jean, or as my grandma might, Bridget. Dementia, it's a cognitive decline that impacts millions of Americans. So the book that we're highlighting today is likely to be very relatable to so many families. Sometimes Grandma Calls Me Jean is a book from Missouri-based author Jill Pietroburgo. It's a loving story following a year's journey in the lives of Grace and her grandma, as Grace learns about dementia. While her grandma's mind is changing, her love remains the same. And today we welcome the author Jill Pietroburgo in studio. Jill, thank you for being here to share more about this story with us.
Thank you, Paige.
Tell me, what was your inspiration for this book?
Well, the inspiration is my mom. My mom had dementia, but I honestly wasn't thinking about writing a book, Paige. I was kind of waking up one day between asleep and awake, and I had words just kind of flowing in my head. And I got up and I wrote them down because I might forget them. And so then I just really prayed about it, and I felt that I was to go ahead and figure out how to put these into a book. And so, now that I did that, and my mom has now passed away, so she passed in November, but I was doing this while she was still alive. So now that she's gone, I see that it really has honored her, and it has given her a voice still to talk about love and compassion for those who are walking this journey. So
in a way, it keeps her name and her memory alive as well.
Yes.
You get to continue talking about her, and I think that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the story inside the book itself. Sometimes Grandma Calls Me Jean. What happens inside the pages?
Well, inside is Grace and her grandma, and like you said, it goes from a spring to a spring, and so it covers that year's time span. And my illustrator, Heidi, she does this beautiful job of just showing the different seasons of time, and you can feel the time passing with that. And then, grandma's changing with the story too. And I think you might miss that at first on your first reading, and that's kind of the beauty of the book, that I feel like it's simple, but yet it's very deep in a lot of ways. And, it's just Grace continuing to never change. She continues to just continue to reach out to her grandma and show love and compassion throughout the whole story, no matter what stage her grandma's in. So.
And isn't that beautiful, the way that children do that in real
Yeah, and I
life
think that's
as
very
well?
realistic.
Yeah. You're right, the book is so fascinating because you can read it again and again. You're learning something new with each read. Maybe you're noticing something new, and as the seasons change in the calendar year, it also signals how the seasons of life change too.
Yes.
You talked about Grace in the book. She's inspired by a real Grace, right? Your daughter?
Yes, Grace is my daughter, and so, I just really wanted to have Grace in there because I wanted children to be able to relate to a child. And, our children ourselves, we used to live in St. Louis, and then we moved back to West Plains, Missouri, where we live now, and our kids were 7, 10, and 12. And so we were first taking care of my dad and then my mom. So 14 years they were a part of a care team. And so, they've walked this journey with us, and we've been able to model that. And, we weren't perfect parents or perfect caregivers, but we do feel like we had opportunities to learn from our mistakes. And I think a big thing for people is to give yourself grace, because it is a journey that you've not walked before. So,
I appreciate that. Yeah, there's no one right playbook written for any of our families. They're all so different. The journeys are so different, even if maybe even the diagnosis is the same.
Right.
The illustrations are lovely. I wore purple for you today, and that was in honor of, I think, a happy coincidence in your book with you and your illustrator. Purple kind of becomes a theme throughout. Talk about that a bit. Yeah,
so Heidi was actually, she was from Canada, and so I found her on Upworks, and it was her first book, my first book, and so we just kind of built this relationship together of how to put this book together. And she was so insightful that pictures I would send her, she was like, I noticed Grace she's just wearing a lot of purple. What if we just carry purple throughout the book. And at the time, I didn't even know purple was like the dementia color. And so when I found that out one day, I could not wait to message her and just say, look, God's taking care of all these details. We don't even know what we're doing, but.
It was meant to be.
Yeah.
And speaking of purple, so what I love, another thing that I love about this book, Sometimes Grandma Calls Me Jean, of course you have the story itself with Grace and Grandma, but at the very end, and you can kind of see that hint of color here, some tips, some advice, a few things that you found could be helpful to help children learn how to navigate this. What are some of those that you were able to include?
Yeah, so I wanted to not just be a story. I wanted to be able to give, parents a way to like incorporate their children into being a care team member. And so there's things about, making sure we're helping our kids have empathy, compassion. There's specific, lots of ideas that, I wanted to have things that you didn't have to go out and buy a bunch of materials or something, because there's just basic things that you would probably just normally think of, but like, painting fingernails or having a child read to a loved one, having a snack together. My mom loved music, so it would be us singing hymns to her or, listening to Spotify together with gospel music. One of the things I loved was these mats that I bought for her that were like you're painting, but you're painting with water.
Yeah, we have some of those at my home for my toddlers. And something interesting that I've learned, the way that conversations, activities that I do with my toddler can also be helpful when I'm with my grandmother, who is also experiencing these changes too. Yeah, so you really collected so many resources and putting them all together in this book. This book has gone on quite a tour. Tell me about some of the places that you have shared this story and the children that you've shared this story with.
Well, the furthest place, we happen to be in Turks and Caicos with family. And so I always take, I don't know if you do this, Paige, but I take books with me wherever I go, because you run into people, you just feel like I want to share a book with them. And so that's what happened. I actually reached out to a school where we were staying nearby, and it's called the International School of Turks and Caicos. And I told the principal there that, about my story, and she said, my mom has dementia, and I really want you to come. And so Phil and I were able to go. That's my husband, and they are in a tropical climate, so they just set out their chairs, and we were sitting outside, and we always do a little mini lesson before I share my story. And this time, the mini lesson we chose to do about seasons, and so we talked about seasons in Missouri, because that kind of have one season, and so we talked about that. And then we talked about the seasons of our lives. And then we related that back to the story as we read it.
Yeah,
so.
A great lesson. Speaking of your children, he has been on this journey with you. He wrote the foreword in the book. What has it been like to kind of work on this project as a team?
It's been great. He wasn't my first choice. Don't tell him I said that. But, I kind of reached out to another lady who had written a book about dementia. And I don't know, what did the kids say? You got ghosted or whatever. But no, I was so thankful that Phil was willing to be a part of that. And, we've been partners for almost 34 years now. So it's been, I wouldn't really want anybody else to be a part of that. So
you have a great team.
Yes.
Okay, Jill, before we wrap up, my final question for you today, we'd love for you to recommend another children's book from another author. What's one that has stuck with you?
Sure. Well, I'm an early childhood special ed teacher, so I read to kids all the time. But one of my favorites, I have it.
You brought it with you, yeah.
Behind my back, is a book called Enemy Pie. And it is by Derek Munson. And basically, it's this sweet story about a little boy, and he thinks he's going to have the best summer ever. But it turns out that Jeremy Ross has moved in next door, and this little boy decides he is going to be, this Jeremy Ross is on his enemy list.
Oh boy.
And so then the dad says, well, I've got a great way to get rid of enemies, and we're gonna make enemy pie. And the enemy pie is looking pretty tasty, but the dad says that they have to, one of the things about enemy pie is that you have to spend a whole day with your enemy and you have to act like you like it. And so, as you can guess, by the end of the story, they start to have fun together and enjoy each other, and the little boy loses his best enemy.
There you go.
So
a great lesson again.
yes.
Jill, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Congratulations
Thank you
on
so
your very
much.
beautiful book. So meaningful, too. And I also want to thank you at home for joining us for Turn the Page with Paige. We hope to see you again soon.